And one of the fundamental methodological problems with genocide studies is it flows out of political activism. With regard to scholarship now I'm speaking, not with regard to its impact on society, but with regard to scholarship. Weisfeld continues, and we came here to speak today about prevention and the issues around that. He argues, considering, and again this goes back to the notion, of political activism being the foundation of genocide studies. That is to say, let's not have more genocides. It is a political movement which has evolved, into scholarship. So his conclusion with regard to this is that, quote, considering that scholars have always put stress on the prevention of genocide, comparative genocide studies have been a failure in your minds.
Entonces, para ustedes, ¿qué piensan que es genocidio?
Even based upon the one fundamental document, the convention, and the name, of course, is very important. This is a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. And I want to return to this, but I have a question which I think the Holocaust is fundamentally, as we know, a European event. That is to say, it took place a long way from where most of you are from. I understand we have some Spaniards in the class or something. Most of you are from Latin America, is my understanding, correct? Perhaps in some way it's a very distant thing. It didn't concern Latin America. The memory of the Holocaust, even though I'm here to talk about the memory of one of the heroes of the Holocaust, Raoul Wallenberg, is nonetheless a distant thing. I am not a scholar of your country. I should know a lot more of the history of Latin America, particularly coming from Los Angeles as I do, but I do not claim to know enough about the history of your country, and not least the recent history with the dictatorship and such.
European historians tend to consider Holocaust as an exceptional event in Europe. Probably in Latin America, Latin American historians have another perspective because they have considered genocide in relation to the history of Latin America as part of the human rights violations on this continent, as a structural part of history, not as an exception.
You're referring perhaps to the destruction of the indigenous peoples throughout North America and Latin America?
Also referring to some more recent cases, like in the early 20th century, the Cauchero genocide on the border of Colombia and Peru. And in Colombia there is a debate going on regarding whether to call genocide the killing, the massive killing of the Patriot Union. 5,000 members of this political party were killed.
Mm-hmm. Your questions are completely relevant and very good, but I'm going to return to my point, which hopefully will then refer back to your questions. Quote, many still remembered atrocity stories about the Germans in the First World War. I thought, he wrote, genocide is so easy to dismiss because people do not believe it until after it happens. Nonetheless, he was an extraordinarily determined man. He was a tremendous personality, a tremendous intellect, and he didn't give up. And remarkably enough, he was asked to draft a memorandum for President Franklin Roosevelt about the Nazis' genocidal policies, as he understood them in 1943. Who can stop genocide? Raphael Lemkin or Franklin Roosevelt? Quote, I was asked to write my memorandum on one page. For several days I worked on this one page.
Durante varios días estuve trabajando en esta sola hoja.
How could I compress the pain of millions, the fear of nations, the hopes for salvation from death in one page? To swear?
Yeah. ¿Puede decir malas palabras?
He became a big pain in the ass for a lot of people.
Para muchos.
He died penniless.
Murió sin un centavo.
The man who is responsible for this document, 6 people showed up at his funeral when he died at the age of 52 years old. And again, he was both operating under his imagination of history
Y estaba nuevamente trabajando con su imaginación acerca de la historia
and his own family having been wiped out. He was absolutely determined that the new United Nations would do something. But what is very interesting politically and historically is that this controversial document was adopted so quickly by a new organization in 1948. December 9, 1948. This is the first international document of human rights. History's first international document. And it took place in 2 years, a mere 2 years of discussion. The importance of knowledge.
Como académicos sabemos la importancia que tiene el conocimiento.
One of the problems of Holocaust studies, it's not as big as people think, but we spoke about the atrocity stories affecting the atrocity stories from the First World War affecting political action in the Second World War, and they did. Holocaust denial remains an issue.
La negación del holocausto sigue siendo un problema.
Genocide denial remains a fundamental political and epistemological issue. Now, you may remember the David Irving trial when the pseudo-historian David Irving sued an American Jewish historian named Deborah Lipstadt for libel because she called him in print a denier of the Holocaust. And Irving sued her for libel.
Y Irving entonces le hizo un juicio por calumnia.
In a British court, which is easy to do. A little side note, Irving is an anti-Semite. He is a Holocaust denier. There's no question about that. And then just to confuse you a bit more with regard to denial,
y para confundirlos un poco más acerca de lo que es la negación,
if you go to the web today, how many websites will you find denying the French Revolution? How many websites will you find denying the Russian Revolution? How many websites will you find denying the Holocaust? So why does Israel support Turkey's denial of the Armenian genocide? That's a different lecture. During the trial, Irving defended himself. Excuse me, he represented himself. Lipstadt was the defendant. And he was working very hard. He was tired. Irving is an admirer of Adolf Hitler.
Él es un admirador de Adolfo Hitler.
Oddly enough, Irving now conducts tours to the death camps in Poland. And during the trial, I always say this because it's quite funny, he was tired, right? He was working very hard, he was very tired.
Y durante el juicio estaba muy cansado porque estaba trabajando mucho, siempre lo cuento como una anécdota.
And at one point he turns and addresses the judge, and he doesn't say, "Your Honor."
Y no dice.
He says, "Mein Führer."